Good to have you on CNBC-TV18
Thank
and
you.
here at IIT Delhi for the Townhall. You
Very
lost a
well.
bet to your wife because she thought that you were going to take on the Uber opportunity and you weren't so sure. What made you finally decide to do it?
Well, my wife was always a believer, right? And I was competing against these capital names, Jeffrey, Immelt, Meg Whitman, these legends of industry. And I'm the dude who ran Expedia, right? With a long last name. So, but my wife always had faith in me, and she always, from the very beginning until the end, she just said, "You're the right person for this role. I'm telling you, you're the right person." And so she bet me $5, and I owe her $5 because it turned out that she was right. But when it came to the decision point, when they offered me the job, I kind of thought back to the advice that I always give young people, students or engineers about their careers. And I always say that you want to think about three things. One is you want to work with people who you like. You want to work with people that you respect, because why waste your time, working with folks that you don't respect? That's number one. Number two is you want to work at a company where you can make a difference. Working it's about making a difference in your own way. And everyone can make a difference in their own way, but you want to go to a place where you can make a difference. And then finally, you want to make a difference at a company or an organization that's making a difference. Number one for me at Uber was something that I couldn't solve for. I met the board members, but it's been, that was a little random one as far as what I like the people. And the people at Uber and the team has been extraordinary. I got lucky on that one. On the second and the third one, as far as going to a place where you can make a difference, Uber was in a lot of trouble. It was a real turnaround. And at a company that can make a difference. This is a company that is going to reinvent mobility going forward, is going to be one of the defining factors in what mobility means on a global basis for us. So number two and number three, I had big check marks. And that was ultimately the decision that I took.
What about your equation with Travis Kalanick now? There's been a lot of press on where things currently stand between the two of you. Apparently you got off to a great start. It's a bit shaky now. Where's the story between you and Travis? I
think, listen, under the circumstances, this has been a very difficult transition for the company, and it's been a difficult transition for Travis as well, right? I mean, it's from going and leading this company as the CEO to having to step back a bit as a board member. That's a tough transition. And obviously the press coverage would be difficult for anybody. What I can say as far as Travis goes is these transitions can be difficult, but he's always been there. He is still passionate about the company. He's rooting for the success of the company, and he's always been available for me when I've wanted to ask advice for him, etc. Now, in my coming on board as a new CEO, I have to make my mark. I have to take the company in a different direction, and I have. And that is probably a direction that Travis, might or might not have taken it, but I've got to take it in the direction that I believe in, with the culture and the norms that I believe in. But what I can say for Travis is he's been there for me. When I call him, he gives me good advice. And he and the board are rooting for the success of the company, which means they're rooting for my success, and so far so good.
I want to talk to you about the interesting development, and that has to do with SoftBank.
Yes.
And I remember you said that I'd rather have the SoftBank capital cannon behind me than facing me. You have an interesting situation in India where SoftBank is also the largest shareholder of your fiercest competitor, Ola.
Yes.
So how does it all work?
Well, you'll have to ask them that question. I think, listen, SoftBank is a very big picture investor. And when I talk to Masa about his beliefs, Masa's core belief is that the ride-sharing space is a space that's going to grow. People 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when these folks get old enough to drive a car, because they're so young they can't be that old, they're not going to want to own cars. Right? Cars are a huge waste of assets. On average, cars on a global basis are used 4% of the time, and 96% of the time they're sitting around. It makes no sense as far as asset allocation goes. So more and more as we move forward, and as our business scales, And as we introduce new technologies like pool, where people can share a car, or we introduce new technologies such as autonomous, the cost of our services is going to start rivaling the cost of car ownership. And ultimately, our services are going to, I believe, replace car ownership. And just to put that into perspective, we account for less than 0.5% of miles driven on a global basis. Less than 0.5%. When our cost of our services get closer to car ownership, and I think it's going to be in 5 to 10 years, we're not talking about a business that's going to grow 50%. We're talking about a business that's going to grow 10x, 20x, 30x once we become a true alternative to car ownership. So I think SoftBank isn't thinking about Ola versus Uber. SoftBank is thinking about Ola and Uber versus car ownership, and I think that's a pretty darn good bet.
But still, I mean, from a practical perspective, you're competing with them in a market like India. You know, SoftBank clearly putting big money into Ola as well, which it's using against Uber to compete in a market like India. What's the conversation that you then have with Masa?
But I view this as we're not spending against Ola, we're spending against car ownership. We are actually building mobility as a service, and I think our competing with Ola, it's a healthy competition because it forces us to improve our product, it forces us to be innovative, it forces us to reduce prices, and ultimately that's going to come at the cost of car ownership. The businesses have to scale, they have to get more efficient, but you know, I don't have to worry about that. I just have to compete against Ola. I'll let Masa worry about, you know, what he's doing with his capital.
Okay, since we're talking about the future of mobility and we're talking about the future of Uber, you've also said in an interview that you don't want to be seen purely as a car-for-hire company. You want to have the ability to run a bus system for a city, for instance. I mean, how much into the future is that? I
think that it's within 5 years. So if you think about our business, and I'll compare us to Amazon. Amazon started with books, okay, and then was able to expand into many other products and then opened up their marketplace to third-party retailers. I view us as where we want to go is be the Amazon of mobility. So we started with cars, which are books. Now if you take a look at our products, we've got cars and we're introducing auto and moto, for example. We're introducing pool as well, and we're also introducing other products such as Eats, which is a food delivery business that's growing very, very well in this marketplace. But we're not just about moving people, we're now about moving food, and we're going to be about moving things going forward. All of those are new product lines that we're adding, not in the retail space, but in the transportation space. The next step that we're taking is actually opening up our mobility platform. So for example, in San Francisco, this is a small test and it's going to expand, we are having a third-party company called Jump, which is plugging in electric bikes into our platforms. These are not Uber bikes, these are Jump bikes, but they're showing up in our platform so that our users can use them. You can expect that to happen over and over so that third-party mobility services can plug into an Uber. Where I want to get to is a world where you can take a train to commute or a ferry to commute, and once you get to the other side, there'll be a moto driver waiting for you, taking you from point to point, from the train station to your work and back, etc. And ultimately, our technologies, these matching technologies, the payment technologies, are going to extend beyond the private sphere, I believe, but also into public partnership as well. We're early in those conversations. It's going to require a lot of dialogue and a lot of trust, but I want Uber to be about getting you from point A to B, regardless of the way you get there.
You know, you said that you also want to have the ability to move things. So is a foray into the logistics business something that you would consider as well?
I think it's certainly something that we are considering, and actually we're more than considering in the U.S. There's a business that we have built called Uber Freight. And Uber Freight, if you look in the U.S. at least, the way that freight moves around is that shippers will, for a certain percentage of their shipments, they call up a broker and they say, I want to move this shipment from point A to B, it's this many miles, it's got to get there by X date. And these brokers start calling truckers who are independent contractors, mostly in the United States, to get a bid, and get that shipment through. There's a huge friction cost to that. These brokers, they charge too much. So what we're doing is we're taking all of that process, we're using our marketplace technology, supply, demand, and pricing technology to totally automate it, so that we're essentially building an electronic Uber for freight, and at the same time we're working on autonomous trucking technology so that we can serve parts of those routes and eventually all of those routes through autonomous trucks and radically reduce the cost of shipping as well. So we are now actively working on getting things from A to B as well.
Outside of the issues and the challenges that you're dealing with inside the company, from an external perspective, what are you most worried about? What are the big risks outside of the regulatory risks that you're most concerned about today?
As far as Uber goes?
Yes.
I think the biggest concern that I have is, listen, we had a very tough 2017 as a company. And part of it was the company growing too fast and making some decisions that were about growth without thinking about what the consequences were. There's a real temptation in that kind of a world to shift too far the other way, which is to become too conservative, to create bureaucracies around decision making, to not want to take risks, etc. We haven't done everything right as a company, and certainly the company recognized that there was a change in leadership needed, and I'm part of that. But there was a lot right done about the company, the entrepreneurship, the drive for success, the passion around mobility, the quickness of decision making and the scaling of this business. All of that was right. And so I want to take the best of what made Uber what it was, this enormous company that grew faster than any other company in the world, this entrepreneurial bent, together with kind of the responsibility of growth, the partnerships that you have to build with regulators, with cities, etc., and put those two together in one really dangerously great animal. I don't want to shift too far the other way too fast.
So you brought in the adult supervision that was needed?
Well, I brought some adult supervision, but I still want to be a kid.
In the fourth quarter, your loss is down by about 25%.
Yes.
Gross revenue for the year is up 85% to $37 billion. What are the levers that you're going to push now to ensure that you continue to bring the losses lower?
The lever is scaling. Okay, so this is a business that from a bookings basis, it grew 80%. From a revenue basis, we're going over 100%. And what I look for is increasing automation and making sure that every single transaction and every single driver and rider that we serve gets the perfect experience. Right now, we get too many calls to our customer service lines. We get too many errors. And I think using automation and using smart data to reduce those errors is actually going to reduce our costs, increase our profit pools, and help us grow expenses much, much more slowly than revenue. So the business is scaling. I think we're on a very, very good path, and we just need to keep it there.
How important is India going to be from a tech perspective? I mean, it's a market that you want to continue to put money on and a market that you want to continue to bet on. But from a tech perspective, how important is India going to be in the context of what you just said?
I want to make a big bet in India. I think the talent pool here is extraordinary. I think the work ethic here is terrific. I think people are hungry to succeed. I love the entrepreneurial energy in India. So I want India to be our second tech center. You know, San Francisco is the headquarters, but India is going to be a very, very tech center. And who knows, maybe 10 years from now, India will be our first tech center. We'll see.
What's the hiring plan here?
Multiples of where we are now. Multiples of where we are. I'm pushing our teams hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is it that concerns you today as a CEO of a large corporation with global operations, looking at internal challenges as well as the external uncertainties? I mean, we're living in a volatile and uncertain world. As a CEO, on your dashboard, in order of priority, what are the key risks?
Well, I think for me, a key risk and a priority for us is safety. So the top priority that we have as a company is standing for safety. And the fact is that we every day are offering 15 million rides. Okay, and this is 15 million times in which a rider is stepping into a vehicle of one sort or the other and putting their lives in the hands of a driver. And it's when a driver has to trust that a stranger comes into their livelihood and you know, serves that stranger well, but that stranger respects them and treats their car and treats them with the kind of respect that any entrepreneur should have. 15 million every day is a lot. And it's very, very important for us to create the safest environment that we can, both for a rider and driver. And that's what keeps me up every day, because when you're serving that many rides, and it's going to be 30 million before we know it, after that it'll be 50 million a day after that, things are bound to happen. And the challenge for us using data and using identity to create a high quality of service every single time, that is going to be a key to our success. But it's also a responsibility that we owe to our driver partners in our community and our rider community.
You know, since you talked about security and you talked about localization earlier, in the Indian context, security, of course, is the top priority that Uber needs to focus on, given what's happened in the past. What more can we expect? You've introduced things like the SOS button and so on and so forth. What more can we expect from Uber in terms of ensuring that there is 100% security every time you take a ride?
I think, listen, the most important factor for us is to use our data, and we've got the best data scientists in the world, to understand, for example, how a driver is driving and whether or not their actual driving is creating any alarm bells, as far as have they been driving for too many hours, are there safety issues, are they swerving one way or the other. So actually making driving more safe is a big, big deal. Over 1 million people die every year in terms of accidents on the road. And I believe that we can use our data when the car is on the move much more effectively. Ultimately, that's going to be augmented by autonomous driving, which represents a technology that will make the roads radically, radically safer going forward.
I want to ask you two specific questions in the context of the cultural shift that you spoke of in your opening. Transparency as well as communication with regulators around the world. You know, how significant is that going to be from an expansion perspective as well? Because you're facing huge challenges, whether it's London or other parts of Europe, and you do acknowledge the fact that there was lack of transparency on the part of Uber communicating or dealing with regulators. What's going to be the big change there?
I think the big change is having a dialogue with regulators. Listen, we were busy growing, we were going forward, and I think that we were just guilty of not having real dialogue with our regulator partners and expecting the world to adjust to us, and that sometimes doesn't happen. So I can tell you that while nothing is guaranteed in life, every dialogue that we've had with regulators has been constructive, and I think ultimately what we have going for us is that every single city in the world wants mobility as a service. Every single city in the world wants to reduce pollution. Every single city in the world wants to reduce congestion in their roads and wants to improve quality of life and the mobility of their citizens, whether they live in the middle of the city or they live in areas that are more remote. That's something that we can drive as a company. So while we've had our faults in terms of how we've handled particular situations, if you step back, our company is a force for good, and I don't know any city, well, there may be some cities out there, but the vast majority of cities in the world want us playing a part in where they take mobility going forward.
Since we're talking about mobility and the future of mobility, what do you make of Hyperloop?
Of Hyperloop? Well, I like Uber Air more. It's cooler. So we're working on a technology, actually battery technology now is making it possible for us to have vertical takeoff and landing vehicles really in 5 to 6 years in pilot mode, and I think 10 years.
5 to 6 years in pilot mode?
5 to 6 years pilot, and I think 10 years commercializing it. And why spend billions digging a tunnel when you can take to the air?
So let me ask you, who is the leader that inspires you today?
I think Jeff Bezos is an incredible leader for Amazon. I think he's built a founder who can scale the way that he's scaled, a founder who can succeed across different products that he's built, and a founder who takes failure in stride and just keeps innovating is someone who is worthy of great admiration. If we can be the Amazon of mobility, then I think we have a win on our hands.
The Amazon of mobility, that's the vision that you have for Uber. So I'll end then by asking you, Dara, you said it looked messy and it was messy. This is when you got into Uber.
Yeah.
On the messy scale, where are things today?
You know, the mop is still soaking, but it's getting better.
We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Dara. We wish you the very best of luck.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for joining us here in Delhi.
Thank you so much.